It's Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
I'm Bill Saylor, sitting in on the board today for the Prairie Monk.
And last week we started off the week on Monday with a work day at Pope Prairie, and we're doing a teasel harvest. You either pick the seed heads off or you slash the whole stem. We have both alternatives. We also burned the teasel heads that we had taken off a week or so before, and we will do something the same on Monday. We'll leave 115 North Market next to Weft on 9 o'clock. If you know your way around, you can go direct, and some people like to start at 6 o'clock and make use of the cooler temperatures. So you're quite welcome to do that. But we'll leave here usually at 9 a.m. So,
by the way, this is Dave's weekly discussion of things environmental. And so that was your pre-quiz if you're new. Oh, what is this show about? Usually locally environmental.
We had our last street music festival on Friday night, and that was interesting. I enjoy that. I get out there and process seed. It's so multitask a little, but I meet people, and that's rather wonderful. And there's a little bench outside which I use for digesting recyclable materials, but it doubles as a bench for people to sit on. And I was kind of curious. There were at least 7 people sitting on that stoop, which asks the question is whether there should be some chairs around. And I think in bigger festivals, the city and Urbana too provide chairs for people. But people bring their own chairs. They dance, they enjoy, and it's followed by activities at the Poor Bar across the road. And so we watch that and enjoy it. Went out to the Kickapoo Trail. I had suggested that you might want to join the Sierra Club on a walk followed by a swimming pool event at Kevin Green's. He teaches scuba diving, but a friendly storm came up, and it was quite a storm, and it was cancelled. You don't get into a swimming pool when it's lightning around, and so lots of lightning and thunder and buckets of water. I was interested in that area. I am worried about a wide trail going through the Doris Westphal Prairie at Oakwood, so I headed out there anyway, whether it was going to be a swimming pool or field trip. And I'm sure that will happen again. I stopped to double check the width of the trail at Mayview. It's 10 feet. I think we've got 7 miles of 10 feet wide. I think I'm worried about the capping being to cap the creosote on the railroad bed and down the sides. And by the time some of that activity is finished, there's nothing much left of the prairie on either side. So from there through to Mayview is wide, but when it gets to St. Joe, the area between 17th Street, St. Joe, and the Glover, where the Union Pacific comes under the road, and there's a big bridge over the railroad line. That area has been heavily mown. It was really good prairie, and I'm sort of watching mowing that's going on. We just had an instance of a lot of mowing on South Street Savoy, where usually 15-foot batwing bush hogs are used, and they went right behind the signs that said no mowing. And the same occurs elsewhere.
Where was this again?
That was on Route 45.
Because we had it on U of I property. I went on vacation in July, and the low mow sign was removed, and all the milkweed was annihilated. There's a big field of lots of milkweed, a little bit of teasel, which got mown earlier in the spring. Milkweed's coming back already, but I just wonder if that's supposed to be a new management regime or something else.
It's a neatness and tidiness syndrome that is very wasteful of energy, and it takes out the biodiversity and is rather cruel.
In the past several years, it's pretty much been left alone. And, it's a haven for monarchs, this little patch. This is off of Windsor Road, west of First Street.
But it happens all over the place, and it happens with very big mowers. Iowa, in such situations, has a midnight requisition, and they take the huge mowers and replace them with 4-foot mowers. Because at this time of the year, it's appropriate to go down 4 feet on either side to the ditch that's usually on either side of the road. And that's quite adequate. When you look at these places, the amount of energy needed to go through a prairie, for instance, is huge. That means equipment expenditure, it means labor expense, and one has to wonder the reason why. Part of the reason why is that there's a reluctance to mow just 4 feet and have the equipment setting over the road, because it's dangerous, especially when the road is narrow. So the other alternative is to set your mower at the edge of the road and then mow into the field. So at Oakwood, the mowing has been right into the prairie. And on the other side, where there's pollinator acreage, the wheels of the tractor were 2 feet into the field, and I suspect that some of the field was also mown to occupy that 15 feet. I think that's unnecessary, and you might not want to do a midnight requisition and change all the equipment, but certainly there should be some smaller mowers in each township supervision place or wherever there's a lot of mowing going on. Sometimes I watch mowing where the mowing is done by the date, not by the amount of growth. So sometimes if you have growth in the spring and growth in the fall and nothing much in the middle of summer when it's hot, I see people mowing nothing, but they're mowing dirt, and that dirt throws up allergies and all sorts of things. So it's better to have a contract to mow according to the volume of grass or whatever is there. So I went to Oakwood and photographed some of that sort of thing. The interesting part of this is that mowing into the prairie leaves you with access to the prairie, so you can actually see the biodiversity in that 1 mile of prairie that was used by Doris Westfield to pick seed, and a whole lot of others of us who have picked seed there to restore or recreate prairies elsewhere. If a wide corridor, 10 feet wide for the actual road, but malleated or manipulated on either side, you take out that rather wonderful stuff. When there's only 0.01% of our 2/3 prairie that's been saved formally by the state. That's a horrendous figure, and it means that we've almost lost our ecosystem. It rained nicely, and I am interested in the block design that you see when you see a certain light pattern coming in after rain. There's a sort of art value to this, and so I took a few photographs there, and perhaps we'll put that up on a video. I was interested to see some of the results of what we've got into, which is really drought, and there's cracks in the soil, and there's tremendous biodiversity there. The corn plants are perhaps 3 inches apart, and if you look down the road, you have to know that this particular plant is biomass, whether it's for human consumption or whether it's for alcoholic addition to gasoline. It can hardly be replicated by any other crop. So the two crops we have are corn and soybean, and that almost denies any biodiverse plots. There are some set-asides, there are some pollinator plots, some of them quite considerable. The federal government has been providing money for pollinator plots that is equivalent to corn, and even a little better than corn in some cases. And this year it probably is better because the rainfall has been such that the farmers haven't been able to plant their crops, and if they do plant their crops, they're late, so they're not going to yield as heavily as previously. But it behooves us to realize that we don't have other crops that can compete with corn and soybeans. I did come back via Fithian, and there's a nice little interurban on the Kickapoo Rail Trail. It's been preserved and dignified, and it will be part of that corridor. I did pass an elevator on Route 49, and I thought that was a good symbol for the commodity trade that is so prevalent in this community. Later in the week, there was a broomcorn festival, and that's interesting because I often know people and meet with them, and we share a lot of information, and I pick up information. I just ran into one person from the county, and I noticed that he was getting up slowly, but he is young, but facing cancer. And we had a long discussion about that. My brother has lost out to a very similar cancer, and we need the biodiversity that we have in that prairie. We don't know what we will want it for, but we need the biochemicals that make it possible for people to survive.
That's a sweet corn festival.
Yes.
Not the broom corn festival. Right here in Urbana.
Yes.
Not down in Arcola.
So then I went to the MTD people. I'm always interested in what MTD is doing. One of the problems we have locally is how to connect the Kickapoo Trail to Champaign and to the west. The federal government and state governments are getting quite worried because the number of people who are dying on bicycles is quite considerable. There has to be a safe way through town. So we talked about that a little bit, and it's possible that there might be some state money that would allow us to at least think about, at least try and design a trail through the community. Norfolk Southern comes into Urbana. The trail is on the east side of the end of their yards. It's the abandonment of the Norfolk Southern Railroad to Danville that's making the Kickapoo Trail possible. If you were imaginative, you could probably, instead of trying to run the Kickapoo Trail through East Main Street, which is fairly narrow, if you could take over some abandoned railroad track that would allow you to reach the MTD headquarters, then go across University Avenue through this sanitary treatment plant, and then onto a piece of land that I think the Park District rents from the sanitary district on both sides. This is Chiefs Memorial Park, it's called. And then that lets you get onto Kerr and then to Broadway and around Busey Woods to you can then check several different streets that go through there and get to Champaign. One of them that's most useful is Washington, and it lets you get under the Canadian National Railroad in downtown Champaign. There's a nice little corridor that used to run from about Washington Street through to West Champaign. It was called the Wabash Line. It had a derailment about 2 or 3 years ago and was closed. So I would like to see that little piece of land extended, and it reaches toward State Street. And then it becomes railroad again. So you can think your way through Champaign by leaving parallel to the railroad line. That's not unusual to have a rail with trail. So you could follow the active Norfolk Southern line through, but then you're going to get to the where the line goes over Lincoln Avenue, and you might be able to do this in Europe, where the bicycles are allowed to leave first, and the vehicles go later. But this is it would be pretty horrendous to do a rail trail across there. So that's why we're thinking of something to the north, and possibly something to the south. But at least I want to encourage you, anyone that's listening, to dream about how you'd get across from Urbana to Champaign without losing your life. We have planners. Farnsworth Group is a very well-known planner of urban trails. and they're approachable for this sort of thing, and so are both the park districts and the cities. And there's quite a deal of concern about how you get across streets and how you do it with safety, and how you longitudinally turn off of streets where the car's wanting to go the same direction as you, or you're in the middle of the road, or you're in the side of the road, or you're facing car doors that might open in your corridor. It's not easy stuff, so I would encourage you to think about that.
Since you mentioned this topic, today we're broadcasting live on WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM on Sunday, August 25th, 2019. And tomorrow, one of the nationally syndicated NPR shows that locally WILL carries, the 1A. Tomorrow's topic is how cities can keep cyclists safe, sharing the road, cyclists and motorists and cities. May not be exactly along the lines of what you're talking about, trails, but if you have an interest in this, tomorrow morning on WILL AM will be that program, and then it's online at I think it's the1a.org.
And think about calling in, because people call in quite sensible information. And
it's a national show again, so it might have a more urban scope for their hour.
So I was walking around with MTD, and then I'm still at the Sweet Corn Festival, and I encounter a tower. It's owned by the Army. They use it as a recruiting device, and it has knobs on it, and you can get into a sling that keeps you safe, and you can climb up this tower, which is probably about, I would say 30 feet tall. And then when you get to the top, you hit a button and you can slide down and release yourself from the harness that's taking you up. I thought that was interesting, because one of the thoughts with a retired high school at Paxton is to create a gymnasium that has some of these sorts of facilities. So it was one. I talked to a couple of policemen there. They were standing on a piece of concrete, and I know that underneath that piece of concrete there is railroad trackage. Yeah. It was the railroad that used to be between Champaign and Urbana. When the railroad went through Champaign for geological or whatever reasons, it was 7 miles away from Urbana, so you had to have a little line that was basically drawn by horses, and that gradually got bigger. The Champaign part of it got electrified, but Urbana still kept its horses, and eventually it got electrified too, and this was a means of transportation between Champaign and Urbana. And Urbana actually lost out a lot of its commercial base with this line coming through Champaign. And you have to think about those things when you're standing on top of a...
So it's not a new phenomenon.
Right. So I was talking to the mayor at the time, and Laurel Persing, and hoping that there might be some sort of plastic view that you could actually drive over, but you could also see the railroads and the ties underneath, and years gone by.
You could do a virtual reality thing or something.
Yeah.
So it was only 2 or 3 miles between the two town centers, but it was all mud at the time.
Yes.
You got to keep that in mind.
And after a while, it got so that there were cars lined up in the 20s, and it was a level crossing. So that's when the Paxton Moraine was mined for gravel that allowed the trains to go through there without having to be pushed over the hill, and gave us road pack for putting in a new railroad line, which was east of the old railroad line. So now we have 6 or 8 underpasses. They're not totally ideal, because if you have a semi-trailer, you can you can go into a low underpass and clip the top of your trailer. So you have to be careful when you drive through Champaign and the underpasses.
So the railroad in town here was raised with the fill taken out at Paxton?
Yes. Yeah. So it's just two courses. They used to have a steam engine there to push freight trains over the hill. It's the biggest moraine between Cairo and Chicago.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, south. Right. We could digress more, but I will just say it is just after 1:30, and you are tuned to the Prairie Monk program on WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM. That's Dave Monk telling you.
So the whole principle of the Sweet Corn Festival is sweet corn, and the steam provided for the cooking of the corn is provided by a tractor, a steam tractor. And it's interesting to have something that's an old technology running a very heavy festival. But I'm old enough and ugly enough to have grown up with steam engines. And although farmers had given up on steam engines and had regular tractors, well, some of them still had horses. But
you mean they moved on to gasoline-powered engines?
Yes. So the thing is that steam engines were very helpful. The city councils or roadside people used to use rollers. So if they were preparing a road, you might be using gasoline equipment and regular construction equipment, but invariably there was a steamroller to roll the soil tight and to compact the road. We lived on an escarpment where there were 7 miles of bends and climb at 2,000 feet. So sometimes those tractor-type rollers would come down the hill or go up the hill, and they had to be very careful to have their whistle blowing all the time, so you could hear them for miles away, climbing or coming down the Dorrigo Mountain. The principle of it is that you have a big boiler with pipes in it, and you have a fire underneath it, and you heat the water in the pipes. And you have to be a certified engineer to run that thing, because it can blow up if you're not very careful. If you are moving the tractor, you have pistons that where the steam goes in and moves a piston that then runs a shaft that runs a powered wheel. If you want to keep this going, it has to be fed with wood. It has to be usually has a flywheel which keeps a generator. I'm trying to think what the name of it was, but it's a sort of controlling device. We used to have Cade family had a steam engine on Shady Rest, and when he passed and his equipment was sold, there was a steam engine there. A governor is the word I was trying to look for. It governed the continued movement of the parts, and this flywheel helped that too. And that steam engine sold for, there weren't very many people at the auction, and I was itching to buy it myself, but I had no idea where to put it. And it went for a low price, and the man who bought it took off the governor and commented that the governor was worth more than he'd paid for the whole machine. And,
Okay.
but there are steam engines around. There was a festival in Arcola, which was run by the Moore family, and they would bring in steam harvest equipment and threshing equipment, and it was a sort of organization that moved from place to place, so you could order it up and contract with it. So I looked also at the children enjoying the playing area, and that I enjoyed also, because they were obviously enjoying it, and parents were happy that they were enjoying. So there's a lot of mixture of ages at the. There's also some interesting ethnic involvement. So there were Muslim people there, and they were also enjoying themselves. So that sort of mix I found to be interesting, and both in Champagne with the Taste of Champagne, and with the Sweet Corn Festival, I was rather pleased. I also just walked behind some of the vendors who were selling, and it was obvious that they had a huge population of people. There were lines everywhere, and they were moving food fast, and I thought that was rather good. So I left there, and I'd hoped to go to Rantoul, but it was the days are getting shorter, folks, and so it was a little late to go to Rantoul, but we'll go there on Monday, tomorrow, and remove a few teasels. So if you see us on Facebook, or if you listen to us or view us on public television, think about Monday morning. It's not a time when many people who work can come, but a few people who know us, it seems like 2 hours is a good time for you to get used to doing it, and not ending up with blisters or getting bored with the activity. But it's very, very helpful. There are some things that you also need to know about. If you haven't watched a prairie for 50 years, you don't exactly know what's going on. It really doesn't look very attractive. It doesn't have spectacular flowering. At the moment we do have liatris, two types of liatris. One is finishing blooming, and the other one is starting to bloom. So it looks attractive at the moment. But it's our biodiversity. It's our genetic gene pool. We don't know what we will want out of that prairie in the future. We don't know what the rest of the world will want out of that prairie in the future. If we want to go around the country picking up glycine, which is the soybean plant, then we expected to be able to go to other countries and pick up that plant. But in fairness, we should be having an ecosystem that other people can come to us and pick up genetic material. And some of this is pretty important, and you see it happening at the present time. The Parisians especially, or the French people, getting to be fairly dramatic about the rainforest in the Amazon. It is being burned up at a very rapid rate, and so do you as a community deserve to keep the genetics there for the rest of the world? Do you own it if you're a Brazilian? And is this like somebody's in for a dig to be telling you what to do with your rainforest. Well, there are some people who should be telling the Illinois what to do with its prairies, because in there you need biodiversity, you need connectivity, you need to have that butterfly. Will need to move from Urbana to St. Joe. At the moment, that corridor is so wide and so lacking in native vegetation that the poor creature can't do that. So that's why I'm sort of fairly adamant about having a narrower trail between St. Joe and Ogden and Fithian and on to Oakwood. They're just, we look at those corridors as potential niches. We are aware that the creatures that were in this two-thirds of the country's prairie were adapted to certain niches. They were adapted to fire. So when the settlers came, they didn't like fires. So then we have forests that haven't been burned, and we have prairies that haven't been burned. But the prairies have lost out to agriculture. The soil is so good; it came from the Laurentian Shield, and it's very good for at first livestock, and then later row crops, corn and soybean. A little bit of wheat, a little bit of barley, but not much biodiversity. And if you're a wasp or a fly or a insect or a meadow vole, you need a home, and corn and soybeans doesn't make that possible. And if you then decide to herbicide the one weed that is a pest for yours, then you not only herbicide the insect that might survive there, but you take out all the biodiversity. So we have to think about railroads herbiciding their right-of-way and power companies herbiciding their right-of-way. There's interesting alternatives. There's a helicopter that can have a chainsaw on the end of it, and it can take out a tree that might short to a corridor. We want our electricity, but we also should think about growing prairie under that railroad line. Did you have something to say there? Yeah.
No, you covered it.
Okay.
I was going to mention the pollinators that are important for the food supply.
Yes.
Also
absolutely.
dependent on that prairie habitat.
Yeah, about at least a third of our food is dependent on pollinators. And,
without getting into the details of their individual preferences.
Yes. Interestingly, the biodiverse prairie doesn't always do exactly what you might want it to do, whether it's a prairie or something in the ocean, or it doesn't always react the same way. So this year, people learned to recognize a couple of rather prominent prairie plants. There's dock and compass plant. And compass plant is the nth degree in survival. It has deep roots, like 10 and 15 feet deep. It has a huge root like a carrot that is at the crown about 10 inches across. It is hairy, so when the wind blows, it doesn't desiccate the stem. It has invaginated leaves, so it drops off a lot of its breathing pores or stomates, and that prevents the loss of water. It is engineered to be strong, so if you walk through a field of compass plant, you're going to feel it. The stem may be at least a half an inch across, but it's rough and tough. and it has leaves that face north and south. The reason being that the sunlight can shine onto the plant without burning out all the water that's in the leaves. So whereas originally the compass plant had a broadleaf, it now has an invaginated leaf, but it also faces north and south. And
meaning it's aligned north and south.
Yes.
So it actually faces east and west. So it doesn't
yes, it
have
faces east and west.
so that it doesn't have a south facing.
Yes.
Leaf,
So
or
the sunlight hits the ground beside the leaf, not on the leaf.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always that you can assume that every leaf is going to face north and south, but there's a good statistic of if early settler, humans have a brain that means that if they go 100 miles, they're going to be back on their doorstep, and it was extremely frustrating. So they discovered this plant. It probably wasn't named compass plant at the time, but it shortly got the name of compass plant. And it's so tall, 8 and 10 feet tall sometimes, especially when it's on good Drummer and Flanagan soil. You could get on the pommel of your saddle. The pommel is the front part that's a little higher than your saddle, and you could look for that plant, and then you know when you're going north and south. So it's a very prominent part of the prairie. But guess what? This year, we haven't seen any fruiting bodies. Lots of leaves, but no fruiting bodies. And this is not unusual in a biological setting. The dock is performing as usual. But I've watched the Pope Prairie at Rantoul for many years, and sometimes the purple cornflowers are wall-to-wall. This year, they're not wall-to-wall. And those that have grown sometimes nod their heads as if they didn't really appreciate the season. You don't know whether it's climate change or whether it's some distribution of the weather or some other niche, but it's common. This year, the Liatris is doing very well. But it means that if you want to get excited about a prairie, you have to visit it quite a few times and over quite a few years. And, some of the other plants you get to know too. If you're doing a pollinator plot, yellow coneflower waits till the soil is a little bit firmer. We don't quite know what, but it becomes very dominant in the 4th year, and then it sort of slacks off and retains a few plants here and there. But it's not like the 4th year when it's really very prominent. Other plants, mostly perennial, so they're there. Our little Pope Prairie is on a borrow pit or a gravel pit. 8 feet of glacial till has been removed for road pack, a little bit like taking the road pack from Paxton down to Champaign to make underpasses. The surrounding territories that haven't been violated for glacial till, you have to know it's on a moraine. So all this gravel is coming from Canada, and the temperature remains about the same, and so you have a moraine where accumulated melting of the ice allowed for outwash plain, and this accumulation of what gets to be very good road pack. So when we first encountered this, this has probably been happening for 75 years or something like that. The triangle beyond the cemetery where we are is enables a modern Route 45 to go out around it, and so advertising billboards were placed there because the visual corridor is good and attractive for advertisers. But when 57 was put in, then this was no longer an advantage. So we bought it at that time. At that time, we'd been watching it for many, many years. And the plants, if you're talking about a compass plant, for instance, it will be very short. At the moment, it's going through that reconstruction, which is almost like being 10,000 years ago, and starting to grow. So the plants that are in the prairie area are short, and they have small flowers, and they survive. They grow roots to start with, and then they gradually accumulate a little bit of organic matter, and gradually become an ecosystem in a small plot. And gradually we have lots of gravel, but we have these plots. They also invite a few of the weeds that like that sort of environment too. But so they can come in. We're very jealous of that little prairie. It's very much a remnant, and bespeaks of a remnant because the area is wide at that point. There's a railroad. If you go east-west across with a transect, you go railroad, and then a retired interurban, and then a retired Route 45. Then there's a triangle. We have 9 acres there. And then on the east side, there was going to be a dual highway, but 57 went in, and the second leg was retained and planted to ash trees. And this is an exercise for some of you. If you're planting a community to species, it pays to be a little bit biodiverse. The emerald ash borer has visited that area, and all the ash trees are now dead or almost completely dead. And interestingly, underneath the prairie that they were planted on is growing because there's more light. So I'm looking at the time. We've got 3 minutes.
3 minutes?
So
You've got 8 minutes. But I've got a song we can play to
okay.
fill out the time if we like.
In amongst those prairie plants are annual plants. Most of them are perennial, but a few. So one of them is a Canadian wild rye, and it's a diplomat. It grows well, and you need some plants that say something positive about your corridor.
For a grass, it's showy.
Yes, cordgrass is showy. It's also in a wet location.
For a grass.
What?
For a grass, you can see the wild rye, and it's distinctive.
The grasses are starting to grow at this time of the year. They're there perennially, but Indian grass and big blue stem and little blue stem, they start to grow at this time of the year, and so there is clump grasses. They're not like your lawn grasses growing out and with rhizomes all over the place. They're clump grasses, and so we have them. We don't encourage them to be too much because they can dominate, and prairie can have its own weeds. One of our silphiums, for instance, cup plant, is quite a nice looking plant, but it tends to take over. So you need to be watching your prairies to see how they're reacting. We do have to sometimes deal with herbicide. So we spot herbicide teasel because there's almost no other way of getting rid of that rosette. But then we make sure that if anything that does grow is exterminated. But some plants seem to actually use the herbicide as a nutrition. You're on a railroad right away. There's a Tradescandia or spiderwort seems to really enjoy that location. It comes back quickly. Hemlock is another one that comes back. So if you're a prairie nut, you will look for these weeds, and you'll know the history, and you'll try to encourage the plants. That some of them might be diplomatic. At the moment, we're collecting golden Alexander. Golden Alexander belongs to the carrot family, and it's umbellifery. One little umbrella goes to another little umbrella, and at the moment, if you're careful, you can take your hand around it and grab the seed. If you're not careful, the seed will all fall off, and you have to be careful not to be picking parsnip, which is in the same family, and it looks just the same. One has a little squat seed. The other has a fairly flat seed. So you know how to recognize it, but not everyone knows how to recognize that seed. And so at the moment, we also find that seed is not uniform. Some of it's green and some of it's ripe, and that's one of the things that's wonderful about an ecosystem, that it survives because it comes to ripeness at various times. Which reminds me, we're nearly in the season of New Jersey tea, which is the nth degree at this stunt. It's very hard to harvest the New Jersey tea with a mechanical device because some of the seed is ripe and some of it is green on the same plant. And the prairie people like Prairie Moon in southern Minnesota have gotten down to the point where they can harvest New Jersey tea fairly simply, but it has survival mechanisms that don't make it easy. If you're going to grow tomatoes and you're going to harvest them, then you get your genetics people to breed that tomato so that it comes to a peak at 1 o'clock on Tuesday, and you have a tenderometer that you and you collect all the tomatoes on the one plant are the same quality.
So Dave is going out Monday, tomorrow,
yes.
August 20, what do we say?
This
6th at
yes.
9 a.m. It'll be luck of the draw.
Yes,
for all you all.
So
the old-fashioned way. You can meet at 115 North Market Street next to Weft, or.
So I'm saying for 1 minute left.
Well, I would like some time.
Yes. Okay. This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in. I'm Bill Saylor, working the board today, and I'm going to lead out with an artist who's coming to the Cranert Center opening. The season opening on Thursday, September 5th, 6:30 in the evening. It's all free in the lobby and around. And this is Bombino. It's played a lot in our World Beat shows, and it's playing North African Desert Blues. Hope to see you there. And thanks for tuning in to WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM.